Hey guys, welcome to Black Ambassador of Change. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. We have another fantastic episode for you today. It's Labor Day weekend. Let's talk about the Black community and the labor movement. See you soon. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, guys. Black Ambassador of Change is on. Hey guys, welcome back to Black Ambassador of Change. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It's very important that you do so we can continue to bring you valuable information. So today we're talking Labor Day weekend. Labor Day is generally a time for some to take the long weekend off. Others have a little barbecue. Some may go to the beach. Some may hang out with family. Some of us look at it as the end of the summer or the beginning of the fall, back to school, all those good things or bad things depending on how you look at it. But here at Black Ambassador of Change, we take every opportunity to enlighten and educate. So today we're going to talk about Black people and their involvement in the labor movement and all the benefits, the pros and the cons of it, and the struggles we've been through. At the end of this video clip, the vlog today, we have something very special for you guys. But in order to find out, you have to stay till the end because it's a great opportunity. Many of you may be unemployed. Many of you may be looking to switch fields that you're in right now. This is a great opportunity to do so. So at the end of the show, I will post a link that may change your life. So in order to find out what that link is, please stay tuned to the end of the episode. So take a look at the video and enjoy. Thank you.
Over the past 2 decades, the organized labor movement in the United States has undergone many dramatic changes. The nature of the U.S. economy has evolved from one that was primarily an industrial base to one that is more service-oriented and high-tech driven. The numbers of unionized workers witnessed a steady decline as the employers, supported by right-wing politicians, fought with all their might to prevent the labor movement from organizing workers. For example, Walmart and McDonald's, the country's largest service employers, have fought successfully in blocking all efforts by the labor movement to organize their employees. But in spite of these anti-working class measures, the organized labor movement has been experiencing something of a revival in recent years. More and more service workers in the health, hospitality, fast food, and high-tech sectors are defying all of the intimidation tactics of their bosses and are voting to join the labor movement. And most of these new unionized workers are, in fact, people of color. Has organized labor been instrumental in its support for the ongoing Black freedom struggle in the 21st century? And what is the fundamental character of the labor movement in the so-called post-racial Obama era? And we're joined with William Bill Lucy, the former Secretary-Treasurer of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, the founding president of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, an organization founded in 1972 in the context of the presidential elections that took place. It's rare to have an opportunity to introduce someone who is not only an icon, but someone who had a personal impact on me. I first learned of Bill Lucy in reading a book, Organized Labor and the Black Worker by Philip Foner. It was in the mid-1970s.
Right.
And it was towards the end of the book, and he's describing the formation of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. And I was just floored. I said, wow, this is fabulous. This is something I need to get involved with. And eventually I did. So welcome to the program.
Well, my pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation.
That's great. So you relatively recently stepped down from both positions.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to just go back. You have been active in the labor movement virtually all of your adult life.
Absolutely. I'm at 60 years, give or take a little bit, in that now.
And you were in Memphis in
Right.
1968.
Right.
Can you just say a little bit about how you got to Memphis?
Well, I was a staff employee of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees in 1968. I came on board in 1966 and was assigned to Detroit, Michigan, and got a call one day from the president's office that raised the question, "What are you doing for the next day or so?" Mm-hmm. And I had the wrong answer. I said, "I'm relatively free." So president at that time, a fellow by the name of Jerry Worth, asked if I would go down to Memphis and take a look at what appeared to be something going on. We didn't know what, or didn't even know why. So I went down to take a look. And in fact, what you had was the foundation of a confrontation being built by workers themselves who had just become incredibly frustrated with the process. This is Memphis, Tennessee, 1968.
And these are the sanitation workers.
These are sanitation workers
Right.
Who had been trying forever to form a union, to get somebody to speak for them in this complicated southern major city, as segregated in 68 as it was in 28. And they simply decided that they had to have some ability to find an advocate for them. And somewhere during their discussions, a rather catalytic event took place. Two men, sanitation men, in the back of a truck, as they always did, to get out of the weather. Something tripped the mechanism. The truck crushed them into the packing system. And this became the trigger, essentially, for the strike. And the strike was really about the inability of these workers to get their issues on the table, to get somebody who would be willing to listen to them and take some action. But they were very clear that they had gone through these kinds of processes before. They wanted a clear opportunity to have a trade union speak for them. And this, as I say, caught the eye of the president. I went down, tried to get familiar with the history and try to add some view and assistance to their efforts to do this. It turned into a full-fledged strike of that department. Some 1,300 men were involved. And the incredible contradiction was, here's one of the most powerful cities in the South, who still could not understand that they were an employer and had the responsibility of dealing with a workforce in a modern era. These were men who worked every day, most of them, but still qualified for virtually every public assistance program that the city had. So it was an issue of the working poor. And they were determined that they were going to find a way to build themselves a union. And that program went on for 67 days. Unfortunately, ended with the assassination of Dr. King. But they were determined that the only way they were going to get any relief immediately and progress in the future was to have a union that they had voice and direction of to speak for them on their issues.
This actually raises a question that I've meant to ask you for a long time. AFSCME was successful in Memphis. There were other Southern organizing efforts. Why did AFSCME not do more in the South?
We had a number of campaigns, but in 1968, we were a relatively small union trying to figure out what made the most sense in terms of trying to organize public sector employees, black or white. We had a serious conversation with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and with Dr. King prior to his death about how we do this. And we certainly had no experience in it. Memphis was an incredible experience for us. The model had great possibilities, but we could never tell what we were going to confront. And we certainly did not want after the assassination to raise the specter of we're the union that Dr. King gave his life for, and use that as an organizing tool.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
Memphis was unlike a lot of other places because the workers in Memphis decided themselves they wanted to build a union. You go to other places, you got to convince people that the union is worthwhile. And for back in those days, and probably still now, workers at the lowest level of the workforce, it's always risk versus reward with them. You can't promise and not produce. You can't suggest that they stand before an employer that really holds life and death, in a sense, over their livelihoods. After the Memphis strike, we saw the other example in Charleston, South Carolina.
That's right.
Where those workers, for reasons I suspect similarly, wound up in the same position. We're going to fight until we get a union. That has to be a worker's decision. And I think we were successful in many places with that model. In those days, our union was growing at the rate of about 50,000+ net new members each year. So the idea of public sector employees having rights that entitled them to have a union caught on. Prior to that, the idea of organizing a public sector union in the Deep South was just, unheard of.
Right. And it feels like it's sort of back to the future. I mean, we're in a situation now where public sector workers are losing their rights. What about in the South?
In spite of the setbacks that we've had in the South, public sector workers and predominantly black public sector workers see the value in having a union that is able to speak for them and with them. I would reference a recent Chattanooga organizing loss. Not because black workers weren't committed to it, it's simply the message and the value of organizing was not disseminated in a way that the overwhelming majority of the workforce decided it was something they want to do. We see examples all across the South, and particularly in the blue-collar section. Equally true in the healthcare and health delivery sector. The public sector for a long time has been sort of the entry point for black workers into meaningful employment, as bad as some of the jobs were. They were jobs that folks could get into. And I think particularly in the South, the lack of commitment to organizing reflects itself in different ways. It reflects itself in the political system. Simply because you've got 18 or 19 right-to-work states, and there's a lack of willingness to organize in the states. That means you give up 18 or 19 major political seats without even a contest. And that also means that small group of legislative types can, in effect, set the political agenda around workers' rights.
For the whole country.
For the whole country.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And we see that happen now, where right to work for many, many years was by and large limited to the old Confederacy.
That's right.
You now see it moving into more industrial states, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and the effort for politicians of much more conservative nature to say, well, we want a right to work bill in our legislature. And you find some workers saying, well, that's not a bad idea. Well, it's a dreadful idea because what it does is subjugates the workforce to low wages, low benefits, and affects other parts of the social agenda.
Now, in 1972, you were involved in forming the Coalition of Black Trade Unions.
Right.
With a I still remain very impressed every time I look at the names of the people that were assembled. I mean, the heavy hitters in black labor. Let me ask you a controversial question, though. There was already an organization, the A. Philip Randolph Institute, that had been set up by the AFL-CIO in, I believe, 1967 or something. You and others decided that there needed to be something else. How did you arrive at that decision?
Well, we went through the experience of a long, drawn-out primary contest for the presidency of the United States that involved, initially, I guess, Hubert Humphrey, et cetera, but George McGovern wound up being the nominee of the Democratic Party. And I believe it was Richard Nixon, the nominee of the Republican Party.
Right.
And we had heard and had experienced their economic and social views for years. And when push came to shove, the American labor movement said, well, we're neutral. Well, there is a difference between George McGovern and Richard Nixon.
Indeed.
And at least in the black community, being neutral means one is no better or worse than the other. Well, that just couldn't sit with us. We spent not only the time listening to their views, their economic, projections, their social views, et cetera. And we couldn't go, at least I couldn't go back home and tell people, do whatever you think is right. I mean, the McGovern agenda, which most of us had participated in trying to shape, had tremendous meaning for black workers. And the Federation, the FL-CIO, while it may or may not have had the authority to be neutral, it certainly didn't consider our views while taking that position. Mr. Randolph was an incredible champion of working people, not just black workers, but workers in general. Sat on the executive council. I think at that time, C.L. Dellums was on the council. It became clear to us that either they were not heard or they could not speak. One of the two. And we thought clearly that here is a need for black workers to coalesce around a very clear set of issues that were important in the long run. Richard Nixon, who sort of developed a Southern strategy.
Indeed, he did.
How could black labor leadership go back to black workers and say, well, there's very little difference between these two. And we felt that there was a real need for us to have a conversation about this problem. And out of that conversation, perhaps, would come an idea of what to do. So we, of course, we didn't have emails and Twitters and all that kind of stuff. So our effort was word of mouth to talk to other people who we knew or might have been concerned about this issue, or if they were not concerned about it, to let them know about it.
So that was in 1973.
1973.
And the coalition has been meeting on Memorial Day weekends ever since.
Ever since. We figured Memorial Day weekend was a good weekend for people to meet. If they thought this was an important enough issue, they would use that holiday to do it. We didn't ask anybody to underwrite our activity. We felt that if it was an important enough issue, then people would figure out how to get to the meeting, whether they'd come out of their pocket, come out of their bank account, or whatever. We wanted to be free enough and independent enough to have an open discussion and conversation on any issue that had implications for black workers. And we weren't convinced that we could do that if we were on somebody's funding string.
What's the argument for the continued relevance of a coalition of black trade unionists?
Well, at the time, the presence of blacks in the policy-making apparatus of the Federation was like limited, both at the national level and at the state and local level. Our view was, first, that the American labor movement needs to change its structure so that it can hear all elements of its broad coalition. And so we began our fight to create space on the executive council for African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, women, etc., because that's the labor movement. So we spent a number of years working on that, and finally in 1995, we achieved that breakthrough.
That was with the election of John Sweeney.
The election of John
Richard
Sweeney
Trumka,
and
Chavez Thompson.
Right.
That's right.
Right. And the council was expanded by 12, 13 seats or something like that. Not set aside for blacks, but in recognition of the fact that there are major black leaders in affiliate organizations that have every right to participate at this level of the American labor movement. So we obviously took advantage of that. The labor movement has changed considerably since then, and needs to change more. The movement is not the movement that it needs to be in order for blacks and other workers of color to benefit from the work that it does. And
What do you mean?
Well, I think the nickel more an hour union is gone. While that's important, I think labor now has to be the core, or the center of a broad social movement whose mission goes beyond just the workplace. It's involved in the issues of public policy relating to justice, relating to equal opportunity, relating to equity for on a gender basis. It has to take on all of those as a part of its mission, and has to organize and advocate around those issues. It's not at the point where it can do that now. And maybe sometime before we see that, we have to start it. And one of the classic examples is Ferguson. When you look at Ferguson, I mean, it's like you read the Kerner report.
Right.
Again, I mean, what is fundamentally different now than it was in 67, 68? And every state has its Ferguson. So if we're going to deal with some of the problems that grow out of that, then organized labor and its allies on both sides of the track has to come to the table with ideas about how do we create a society that has opportunities built in as a part of that society's mission for people to take advantage of what are God-given rights. We should not be, quarreling now about the need for sound education policies. We should not be quarreling over the question of inadequate services at the municipal level. We should not be quarreling over, clearly political and discriminatory decisions made at local levels that deny folks access to the political process.
You have an organization of black trade unionists, and anytime black folks get together, white folks tend to get nervous. All right, now, the CBTU, but as you said, was not controlled by someone else. This was a black organization. What's the balance between raising hell and sort of working on the inside?
Well, we were hell raisers, but not around anything that wasn't reality. I mean, the issues we worked on were the foundations of the trade union movement. We just simply said that the policies that we want to participate in must come from a black perspective, not to the exclusion of anybody else, but to the inclusion of our views. And I would hasten to say that on the major issues of the day, we have been right much more than we have been wrong. And historically, black labor has not been a part of the discussion of national economic policy or international economic policy. We have not been a part of the discussion around trade. And the implications of trade are so devastating for us. We have not been at the table when folks had great discussions and debate over the questions of war and peace.
That's right.
And for
Or
those
migration.
immigration,
Right.
immigration, and our argument has been and continues to be that our problem is not so much immigration as it is migration, flowing from the policies of this administration and ones before it. And that if in the long run workers are going to suffer the consequences of decisions, then they ought to have an opportunity to be a part of making the decision.
Indeed.
And there's nothing radical about that. I mean, and we see the changes taking place where the Federation has to develop a policy, but it's never felt a need to involve our thinking before. And you, when the apartheid issue came up, nobody was surprised. Everybody said, "Oh yeah, well that's wrong." The question is, what are we going to do about it? And I hasten to say, what the CBTU decided to do about it was confront it head on. I mean, you can't have a policy of constructive engagement with evil.
Right.
And if the Federation was uncomfortable about us speaking at that point, that's something that they have to wrestle with. Because the fact that whether it's Africa or Latin and Central America, our policies have impacted working people. And working people look to the leader of the free world in terms of labor organization to help.